Before the judge could speak, the courtroom doors burst open, federal agents and Navy windbreakers swarmed in, warrants in hand. Granger and Mills froze, their smirks vanishing as the evidence of their lies played across the screen for all to see. And in the back, Colonel Adrian Pierce didn't flinch, because this was the moment she had built for, and justice was right on time. "Get your hands where we can see them." The command thundered through the narrow aisles of Lincoln Market like a gunshot. Jalen Carter froze. A bag of trail mix still in his hand, he turned toward the front entrance in confusion. Flashing red and blue lights spilled across the floor through the windows. His heart skipped a beat. What was happening? Before he could move, a force slammed into him from behind. Two officers in plain clothes, Detectives Granger and Mills, pinned him against the display rack, knocking over a stack of potato chips that scattered across the floor like confetti at a funeral. "You think you're slick?" Granger hissed in his ear. "Caught you red-handed, punk." Jalen's mouth opened, but no words came out. He was 17. A robotics team leader. A future MIT student. He had a scholarship letter still tucked in his backpack next to his calculus textbook. What are you talking about?" he stammered, wincing as cold metal snapped around his wrists. His face burned as customers turned to watch, some stepping back with wide eyes, others pulling out their phones to film. Mills grabbed Jalen's backpack, unzipped it, and yanked out a black duffel bag. Jalen blinked. He'd never seen it before. "What is that?" "That's not mine," he said, his voice rising with panic. "Right," Mills said, holding it up. "Just another innocent kid with 10 grand worth of coke on his way to choir practice." Jalen shook his head furiously. "No, I came here for snacks. I just got out of class." But the detectives weren't listening. They were already parading him out the door, where 2 squad cars waited. The crowd outside had grown, neighbors, teens, older folks, murmuring, watching. A woman in a denim jacket held her phone high, recording. "This ain't right," she whispered. "That boy didn't do nothing." Jalen's eyes locked on hers. He wanted to beg for help, scream that he was being framed. But Granger shoved him into the back seat, slamming the door shut with finality. "Tell it to the judge," Mills said through the glass, smirking. Inside Lincoln Market, the store clerk, a wiry man in his 60s named Sal, was wiping down the counter with exaggerated calm. He hadn't looked at Jalen once. He didn't need to. The cameras were down, routine maintenance, he'd later say, and the 2 men who had been loitering near the refrigerator section when Jalen walked in were gone. Vanished. Like smoke. And with them, the last sliver of doubt anyone might have had about what really happened. Jalen sat alone in the back of the cruiser, head spinning. His chest rose and fell rapidly. He tried to make sense of it. There had been no alley. No exchange. No drugs. Just homework, robotics plans, a plan to stop at the market and grab a bottle of Gatorade. And now, this. The door opened and Granger leaned in. "You're not walking away from this, Carter." "Not this time." "What time?" Jalen cried. "I've never been arrested in my life." Granger smiled. "That's about to change." At the station, his shoelaces were taken, his belongings bagged and tagged. They fingerprinted him. Took his mugshot. Treated him like a criminal. He tried to explain. Over and over. But no one listened. The duffel bag was all they needed. They had a witness. They had footage, grainy, inconclusive, and edited, of a black teen handing something to someone behind the market. Jalen begged to see the full clip. "Those cameras were down," the officer on duty said with a shrug. "Guess we'll never know." He was allowed 1 phone call. His fingers trembled as he dialed. "Mom," he whispered as soon as she answered. "They arrested me. They said I had drugs. But I didn't. I swear. I don't even know where the bag came from." "Jalen, baby," Celeste Carter said, her voice steady but low. "Breathe. Just breathe. Where are you?" Newark PD. I'm coming. Right now. I'll get you out. But she didn't hang up. Not right away. After telling him she loved him and that she believed him, she made another call. A different one. A call she hadn't made in years. One she prayed she'd never have to make. Adrian, she said as the line connected. They got him. A pause. A low inhale on the other end. Where? Lincoln Market. They said they found drugs in his bag. It's a setup. I know it. Say no more, came the calm reply. I'll handle it. Celeste put the phone down and stared at her hands. They were shaking. She'd spent her entire life teaching Jalen how to survive as a young black man in America, how to speak respectfully, how to keep his hands visible, how to avoid confrontation. She thought she had done enough. But none of it mattered. Because someone had decided he fit the description. Adrian Pierce hadn't been in uniform for years. But some things don't rust. The 52-year-old retired colonel still held a quiet authority, an edge to her voice that reminded people she wasn't to be underestimated. She was tall, composed, with a military posture that never left her. In another life, she tracked terrorist cells across the Middle East. Now, she tracked something else, corruption on American soil. Pierce moved fast. She contacted an old friend at DOJ. Made another call to a freelance hacker she'd worked with during an overseas cyber-op. Then she sat in front of her multi-monitor setup, the glow of data illuminating her face. Let's see what these bastards are hiding, she muttered. Meanwhile, Jalen lay awake in his cell, staring at the ceiling. The silence was deafening. His thoughts raced. He saw headlines, MIT-bound student arrested. He imagined losing everything, his scholarship, his reputation, his future. He clenched his fists, swallowing the lump in his throat. They think I'm just another statistic, he whispered. But what he didn't know was this: they had just messed with the wrong family. The wrong godmother. And the storm was already building. Celeste sat in her car outside the precinct, staring at the red brick building as though willing it to collapse under the weight of its own injustice. Her phone buzzed. A text from Pierce. I have what we need. Be ready. Celeste looked up toward the building, her eyes narrowing. You should have picked someone else, she said quietly. Because Jalen Carter isn't alone. Somewhere in the city, files were opening. Surveillance backups were being decrypted. Phone logs traced. Body cam timestamps compared. Adrian Pierce was hunting. Not just for proof, but for every single person who had let this happen. And she wasn't stopping until the truth was dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. Jalen Carter had been framed. But this story wasn't about his fall. It was about what happened next, when a warrior entered the fight. And the people who thought they were untouchable discovered what it meant to be hunted. Jalen Carter hadn't slept. Not really. The chill of the jail cell had soaked into his bones, but it wasn't the cold that kept him awake, it was the weight of everything he'd lost in the span of a few hours. His future. His dignity. His name. Now he sat in the back of a transfer van, wrists shackled, his once pristine button-down wrinkled and stained. The courthouse loomed ahead, gray and indifferent, like a monument built to protect everyone but people like him. The van came to a stop. Doors opened. Move, one officer barked. Jalen stepped down into the concrete corridor, heart pounding, lips pressed shut. No matter how loud he tried to speak the truth yesterday, it hadn't mattered. It never did. Inside the courtroom, Celeste Carter sat in the second row, hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes bloodshot from worry but burning with fire. Colonel Adrian Pierce sat beside her, still and sharp as a blade in a tailored Navy suit. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was a quiet warning. She had already started digging. Already started hunting. Jalen was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, and the gasps from the gallery were immediate. The sight of a 17-year-old boy, chained like a criminal, sent waves through the room. But not to Judge Halston. He didn't even glance up. Just leaned back in his chair, flipping through papers like he was skimming a breakfast menu. Jalen's public defender, a weary man named Guilford, rose slowly, already looking defeated. He gave Jalen a brief nod as he sat at the defense table, his hands fumbling through a stack of overused files. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The judge entered fully, and the trial began. What followed wasn't a search for truth. It was a performance. The prosecutor, a smug, overly confident man named Langston, strolled across the floor like a man who had already secured his victory. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth, "what we have here is a tragic tale. A promising young man, seduced by money and opportunity, caught making an exchange behind a neighborhood store. He gestured toward Jalen without ever truly looking at him. It's sad, sure. But it's also dangerous. And it must be stopped." Jalen clenched his fists under the table. "That's not who I am. That's not what happened." But the prosecutor continued. He called Detective Mills to the stand first. Mills walked with the ease of a man who had lied under oath before. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, and delivered his version of the story like a bedtime tale he'd recited 100 times. "We were monitoring the area for drug activity. It's a hot spot," Mills said. "That night, we observed the defendant, Mr. Carter, exiting the rear alleyway of Lincoln Market. He appeared nervous. When we approached, he became agitated. Refused to cooperate. That's when we found the duffel bag." "Which contained what, detective?" "Approximately 2 kilos of cocaine," Mills replied confidently. "Intent to distribute, given the packaging and quantity." "And is this consistent with other arrests you've made in that area?" "Absolutely," Mills said. "He fits the profile." The words hung in the air. Fits the profile. Jalen's mother inhaled sharply. Pierce didn't blink. The defense attorney rose, barely pushing back. "Detective Mills, was there any physical evidence tying Mr. Carter to the bag? Fingerprints? DNA?" "No," Mills admitted, "but were there functioning cameras on the premises?" "Cameras were down," Mills said smoothly. "According to the store owner." "So we're relying entirely on your word?" "And a corroborating witness," Mills added quickly. "Who?" "We'll get to that," the prosecutor interrupted. The next to testify was Detective Granger. His testimony mirrored Mills down to the phrasing. Practiced. Coordinated. Lies stacked on top of lies. "He looked like he was ready to bolt," Granger said. "Like he had something to hide." "Did he resist?" "Verbally, yes. Asked us why he was being stopped. Got loud. Tried to pull away." Jalen's voice cracked in his head. "I asked you what I did wrong. That's not resisting. That's not illegal." But in the courtroom, the truth had no microphone. Then came the witness. A man named Anthony Rollins. He shuffled up to the stand in a faded polo and jeans, avoiding eye contact. "I saw him behind the store," he mumbled. "He gave a bag to some guy and took cash." "And you're certain it was Mr. Carter?" "Yeah." Jalen narrowed his eyes. He'd never seen this man before in his life. But later, Pierce would find out Rollins was no good Samaritan. He was a former informant with ties to Detective Mills, used in several past cases that later mysteriously vanished from review. None of that came up today. The judge didn't ask. The jury didn't blink. The prosecutor played a video, grainy footage showing a black teen-shaped figure near the back of the store. The image was unclear, face obscured. "That's our boy," Langston said confidently. "Caught in the act." "Objection," the defense said weakly. "There's no proof that's my client." "Move along," the judge snapped. Pierce's fingers tapped rhythmically against her knee, measuring every detail. She had already started collecting names: Rollins, Mills, Granger, Langston, Halston. Each one would be held accountable. Her team was already at work. The hacker had just pulled backup footage from the market's DVR. Another contact was scrubbing court records for Mills' prior cases. What they were finding was ugly. But this wasn't the moment to show her cards. Not yet. She watched the judge lean forward, disinterest painted across his face like a permanent feature. "Mr. Carter," he said condescendingly, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Jalen stood. His voice didn't shake. "I'm innocent. I never touched that bag. I never left the store. And I don't know those men. I went in to buy a snack. That's all." The courtroom was quiet. The judge stared. "Duly noted," he said without emotion. "Let's proceed." Celeste's heart shattered. Her son was being railroaded in broad daylight. Adrian Pierce remained calm, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. That night, while the court adjourned and Jalen was led back into custody, Pierce sat alone with a laptop open and 3 phones on the table. One line buzzed. "It's done," the hacker said. "Got the raw footage from Lincoln. The full timestamp. He never went outside." "Send it," Pierce said. "Now." A second call lit up. Her DOJ contact. "That name you gave me? Granger? You're going to want to see his IA file. Never made it past internal screening. Half his arrests are sealed." "Unseal them," Pierce said. "Burn it down." The third call came from the rogue journalist. "The witness? Rollins? Got a sealed plea deal from 6 months ago. Drug charges dismissed after he cooperated with a Newark detective. Guess who? Send me everything." Adrian Pierce leaned back, fingers steepled. The courtroom thought today was about proving Jalen's guilt. What they didn't realize was that the trial had already shifted. The real story wasn't happening on the record, it was happening in silence, in shadows, through connections most people didn't even know existed. Jalen Carter had been framed. But his godmother was done watching. She was about to turn the courtroom inside out. The next time they met? The judge, the detectives, the prosecutors, they wouldn't be sitting comfortably. They'd be squirming. Because Adrian Pierce had spent her life dismantling criminal networks. And this one? It had made the fatal mistake of targeting her family. The morning of sentencing came cloaked in an eerie silence, as if the entire city was holding its breath. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur, the kind of tension that settles into the bones before something seismic erupts. Jalen Carter sat at the defendant's table, shoulders squared, wrists no longer in cuffs but still aching with the memory of cold metal. His mother, Celeste, sat a few rows behind him, clutching a tissue in one hand and silent prayers in the other. And then, like a storm in human form, Colonel Adrian Pierce entered. Dressed in a dark gray suit, her stride was measured, her face unreadable. She didn't look at the judge, didn't glance at the prosecution, didn't acknowledge the detectives. She walked directly to the bench and, with a quiet finality that made every head in the courtroom turn, placed a sealed government folder in front of Judge Halston. "Before sentencing is issued, Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but laced with iron, "you will want to review the contents of this file." The judge scoffed, waving her off without even looking down. "This court has already heard all the evidence, ma'am. We're ready to proceed." "That's not a suggestion," Pierce said coolly. "That's a classified file from the Department of Justice. Check your email. And ask your bailiff to confirm the chain of custody, unless, of course, you'd prefer your name next in line for indictment." Halston froze. The entire room seemed to tilt on its axis. A court clerk whispered something into his ear, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief in mere seconds. He reached for the folder with trembling fingers, flipping it open. As his eyes scanned the top document, color drained from his face. The silence in the courtroom grew thicker, more suffocating, as the judge read deeper. The contents were devastating. The real security footage from Lincoln Market, unedited, timestamped, pulled from an off-site cloud backup, clearly showed Jalen walking into the store. Alone, never once exiting to the alley. There was no exchange. No contact. No bag. Then came the body cam footage, retrieved through encrypted data recovery from Mills's device. It showed Granger standing beside the patrol car, unzipping Jalen's backpack and planting the black duffel inside before radioing in the evidence. No ambiguity. No shadows. Just truth, clear as daylight. And then, the final nail, the audio. A recording pulled from a tapped phone line used during an unrelated FBI corruption probe. Mills's voice, smug and intoxicated with power, laughing to someone off camera. Another black kid. Easy target. Just throw a brick in his bag and tell the jury he looked scared. That's all it takes. We're untouchable. The moment the judge hit play, the courtroom erupted. The jury gasped, several of them leaning forward with wide eyes and open mouths. Reporters in the back began frantically typing. The prosecutor, Langston, jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is inadmissible. We weren't made aware. Sit down, the judge snapped, for the first time truly raising his voice. You knew exactly what you were doing. Celeste broke into tears. Jalen stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, heart pounding in his ears. Granger and Mills sat motionless, their faces drained of all confidence. Sweat pooled on Mills's brow as he reached for his collar, his breathing quickening. Granger looked toward the back of the courtroom, searching for an exit that didn't exist. The doors burst open. Federal agents streamed in, DOJ, FBI, Internal Affairs. Warrants in hand, they moved like shadows, swift and surgical. Detectives Granger and Mills, one agent said, you're under arrest for perjury, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Granger stood, hands shaking. You can't do this, he barked. You don't know who we are. We do, another agent replied. That's why we're here. The two men were cuffed and led. Out of the courtroom as gasps, whispers, and cell phone flashes surged behind them. Langston, the prosecutor, tried to retreat quietly, but Pierce had already filed a formal complaint with the Office of Professional Responsibility. His name would be next on the federal investigation list. Judge Halston, pale and broken, took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. All charges against Mr. Carter are hereby dismissed, he said hoarsely. The record will be sealed and expunged. You are free to go. Jalen blinked, unable to process the words. Free. It felt unreal. It felt overdue. He turned around slowly. His mother rushed forward, throwing her arms around him as sobs racked her chest. You did it, she whispered. You held on. Pierce stood back, giving them space, her expression unreadable. She'd done what she came to do. But the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, Jalen and Celeste filed a civil suit against the Newark Police Department, seeking justice not only for what had happened to him but for every false conviction linked to Mills and Granger. The media storm was massive. Headlines ran 24/7. Framed by the system, teen's life nearly destroyed by dirty cops. Talk shows debated it. Civil rights groups mobilized. Protests swept the nation. Jalen, once just a quiet, brilliant student, now found himself on stage at rallies, behind microphones at conferences, beside attorneys and legislators. He didn't want the attention, but he knew the world needed the truth. And every time he spoke, Pierce stood nearby, silent but resolute, the general behind the mission. The lawsuit ended in a victory, a $32 million settlement from the city and police department, the largest of its kind in the state's history. But more than the money, it was the beginning of something greater. Congress held hearings. Data from Pierce's investigation revealed not just corruption in Newark but systemic issues replicated in precincts nationwide. With bipartisan support and national pressure mounting, Congress passed the Carter-Pierce Accountability Act, A sweeping reform that mandated federal oversight of all departments with patterns of civil rights violations, required third-party investigations of officer misconduct, and banned plea deals based on falsified police evidence. The bill was signed into law just 6 months after Jalen's release. On the day it passed, Jalen stood on the steps of the Capitol. Cameras flashed. His words rang clear. What happened to me wasn't rare. It wasn't a fluke. It was the system working exactly the way it was designed. But that ends now. Not just for me, but for every name we never got to say, for every kid who didn't get their second chance. Behind him, Celeste wept silently. Pierce stood to his left, arms crossed, eyes scanning the crowd like a strategist still calculating her next move. Jalen Carter was no longer a victim. He was a symbol. And in the hearts of millions, he became proof that justice, when pursued relentlessly, could roar back louder than any lie. They had tried to cage him. They had tried to erase him. But instead, they elevated him to a place where he could change the nation. And beside him, always watching, always ready, stood a warrior named Adrienne Pierce, the woman who didn't ask for justice. She delivered it. As the author of Jalen Carter's story, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the listener, the thinker, the person who sat with this injustice and felt the weight of it. This wasn't just a story about a brilliant black student falsely accused. It was a mirror, reflecting the cracks in our justice system, the silent machinery of corruption, and the power of voices that refuse to be silenced. Jalen did everything right. He studied hard. He stayed focused. He followed the rules. But the truth is, sometimes doing everything right still isn't enough when the system is designed to fail people who look like him. The lesson here isn't just about awareness. It's about action. We live in a world where injustice doesn't always wear a mask or sneak in quietly. It often walks boldly through the front door with a badge, a robe, or a title. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. Jalen's freedom wasn't handed to him. It was fought for, relentlessly, by people who knew how the system worked and refused to let it win. People like his mother, Celeste, and his godmother, Colonel Adrienne Pierce. Their strength reminds us that when one voice speaks up, it may be ignored, but when voices unite, they become unstoppable. To every young person listening, your life has value, even when the world tries to convince you otherwise. Your dreams, your future, your identity, no system, no lie, and no corrupt official can take that from you without a fight. And to every adult, parent, or ally, be someone's Colonel Pierce. Use your skills, your platform, your knowledge to stand between injustice and its next victim. Let Jalen's story be more than a moment of outrage. Let it be a call to rise, to organize, to vote, to mentor, to protect, and to build. Justice doesn't just happen. It is demanded, it is designed, and it is delivered by those who refuse to back down. From all of us at Us Justice Stories, thank you for watching, for feeling, and for caring. Thank you for not turning away. We know your time is valuable, and we're honored you chose to spend it with us. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes or reignited something in your heart, we ask you to share it. Not just on social media, but in conversations, in classrooms, and in communities that need it most. Together, we can shine a light on the truth. Together, we can protect the next Jalen. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, stand tall, speak truth, and never stop demanding justice.